Good morning, Vietnam. Always wanted to say that. This is Barry Jones with Standards Plus History Academy. We are discussing the CIA and its role in the assassination of JFK. And I've divided up the involvement episodes into three parts. Yesterday was the ZR rifle part. Talked about Jerry Cobb, Jerry slash June Cobb slash June Corwin Cobb, whatever name she goes by. Uh, According to Mary Haverstick, it was actually Agent QJ Wynn. And I think we established to a fair degree of certainty that this Operation ZR Rifle was CIA through and through. It was all in-house, as opposed to executive action, where the CIA would partner with European criminals or mafiosos to carry out the hits. In this case, everything was in-house. Uh, the operation was signed off on by Alan Dulles. This is all documented. It was signed off on by Richard Helms and Richard Bissell. These are the one, two, three in terms of hierarchy of the CIA signing off on this program. Of course, then William Harvey and Arnold Silver were placed in charge of the program, given complete autonomy. The target was never discussed in the paperwork, nor were the names of the agents themselves. Everything was coded. And including like the headquarters or base of operations, which was coded Germany, which we came to learn actually meant Texas, and the field of operations where the operation was actually taking place was coded Baden-Baden, which was actually Dallas-Fort Worth. And the station that was where QJ Wynn was assigned was Mexico City, which happened to be the same station run by David Atlee Phillips, who was involved in part of the operation to create a cover story for the Patsy. Everybody was in-house, including the Patsy. They wanted people that were tested, reliable, and had been used before by the CIA. So they were looking for CIA assets. And that's where Lee Harvey Oswald came in. So Atlee Phillips was creating the cover story, which according to the creation document, William Harvey and Arnold Silva put together had to be somebody that could be linked with the Soviets and could take the fall. Of course, Oswald was easily linked to the Soviets. The creation document stipulates in the first paragraph the difference between ZR rifle and executive action. That was that ZR rifle was using American assets, in-house CIA assets that were American for an American target, which was a huge difference. Frank Church figured it out when he asked the question. He says, "Why do you need ZR rifle if you've already got executive action? Unless it's not for foreigners." He figured it out. It's for Americans, one in particular. We also learned that the start date of ZR rifle was 5 months after JFK took office. Harvey and Silver were actually putting together the creation document 6 days after he was inaugurated. And of course, the end date was 5 months after his assassination, at which time QJ Wynn got a big payout. Mary Haverstick was able to determine, to her satisfaction at least, that Jerry Cobb, a longtime CIA asset, was QJ Wynn by cross-checking and comparing her whereabouts with QJ Wynn's documented whereabouts, and they were always the same. And payouts, the payouts that Jerry Cobb got were always synchronized with the payouts that QJ Wynn got. And then her deployment to Mexico City was the same time QJ Wynn was deployed to Mexico City. And then her cover job at Bell Helicopter in the fall of '63 happened the exact same time QJ Wynn was documented to have gotten a cover job at Bell Helicopter, same location. So lots of anecdotal evidence. And then, of course, uh, QJ Wynn, or Jerry Cobb, because of her personal longstanding relationship with the author, had admitted, uh, there was always a suspicion that the author had that there was more to Jerry Cobb than just this. She started off to write this book. It was just about females in space. I mean, that's all she knew about Jerry Cobb, was that she was one of the pioneers, one of the early female pioneers in space. But as she got into her story more and more, she realized there was a CIA side to Jerry Cobb. In fact, the CIA side seemed to be the dominant side, and that Jerry wouldn't talk about it. And it took years to peel that onion. And uh, they had ups and downs in their relationship. Mary Haverstick caught Jerry Cobb in lies and half truths, and you know Jerry Cobb would put the author through her paces. I mean, it was a very uh, Mary Haverstick talks about their relationship and how exhausting it was. It was a lot of work, but the story was just too good. And she, originally she was going to make a movie about Jerry's life in space, and that had to be laid aside because there were so many things that weren't ringing true, and she didn't want to put a movie out there that wasn't true. So she began a lifelong quest to find out the truth about Jerry Cobb. And eventually, Jerry Cobb starts revealing things. One of the things she revealed that really, you know, Mary Havstick had no intention of doing a JFK assassination book. That wasn't ever the intention. She wasn't investigating that at all. But when she found out from Jerry Cobb's own mouth that she'd been in Dallas at Redbird Airfield on the day JFK was assassinated, she put that two and two together with the fact that she knew she was in the CIA, and she started, and how closed mouthed, tight lipped Jerry was about other aspects of the case. She started to suspect there was a lot more to the story. Of course, there was. And she's suspecting, Jerry Cobb told her, well, we just sat in the plane for 2 or 3 hours with these Time Life reporters at Redbird Airfield. And that just didn't, if you're a Time Life reporter and the crime of the century is happening a few miles away, you're going to be there. You're going to get off that plane. You're going to cover that story. So it just didn't even make sense that she sat in that plane uh, waiting for what? She'd never say, with these Time Life reporters while all this was happening downtown Dallas. So she began to investigate further, and it led her on quite a journey, and to the point where she is convinced, and I agree with her, that I think that Jerry Cobb was not on that plane. She flew the plane in, she landed there, but she got off the plane and she went into Dallas, and she went to Dealey Plaza. I don't know where she was in Dealey Plaza. Mary Haverstick suspects that she was the babushka lady, and that she was the one holding the camera to her face, and that was actually the special weapon that William Harvey talked about. In the creation document, the first 7 pages were Arnold Silver talking about the logistics of the operation. The last 2 pages are William Harvey's handwritten notes about a special weapon, and it involves a camera. And so the babushka lady, if you look at her, is holding a camera to her face. Now, there's another lady, Beverly Oliver, who claimed to be the babushka lady. So it really comes down to who you believe. Jerry Cobb didn't claim to be the babushka lady. She denied it. She actually said she was on that plane. It was Mary Haverstick who came to that conclusion. And she did so not just by looking at the babushka lady, and it was kind of hard to tell an identity because she had a big trench coat on, she had a handkerchief over her head, and she had a camera to her face. But she watched her. There's camera footage, there's film footage of her or pictures of her walking away from the scene. The way she stood, according to Mary Haverstick, Jerry Cobb had a very athletic build and a very athletic stance. When she stood, her stance was very uh, distinct. She had a very athletic, kind of a aggressive stance, and she was looking at that. The babushka lady, she was standing on Dealey Plaza. She said, "Boy, that's exactly the way Jerry stands, and her mannerisms, and her build, and her size, and her age." And her hair coloring, though her hair was covered with a scarf, there were some bits and pieces that she could see. It was blonde. And of course, the picture of Jerry and the relationship that Haverstick had with Jerry, or she always knew her as a blonde. So, for a variety of reasons, and of course, what she had learned to decipher was code and cover stories, and understood that Jerry always had a cover story, even when they went on vacation together or they went sightseeing together. There was always a reason, another reason for going. There was always a cover story that Jerry had, and the plane story, sitting on that plane, sounded to her like a cover story. And so she begins to, usually when Jerry denied something, it turned out to be true. So that's, I think, anecdotally, a part of the reason why Mary Haverstick concluded that the babushka, or in her mind, she believed that the babushka lady was actually Jerry Cobb. And that's why she's so protected. And that's why her goings on, what she was doing that day in Dallas, because she knew the truth, and the truth was a pretty alarming, actually. And then, of course, another aspect of this is the fact that Jerry / June Cobb, June Corwin, whatever, QJ Wynn, whatever you want to call her, always was protected in all of the investigations after the JFK assassinations. Harvey got called, Silver got called, Dulles had, all these people got called and had to testify at some point or another. And E. Howard Hunt, Frank Sturgis, I mean, just going down the list. Not June Cobb. She was protected by all these layers of subterfuge that the CIA carefully constructed, Harvey carefully constructed, to protect the most central point of the ZR rifle program, which was the actual agent. And, to the extent where, she was layered up with all these different code names, the program was coded in such a way that people would think, if they looked into it, it was a European program. That's why they used Germany and Baden-Baden. That it was not an American program. That's why the base was in Mexico City. The payments were all through Luxembourg, so all the payments were hidden to a certain degree, disguised. I mean, they just went to extraordinary lengths to hide June Cobb's identity from any investigator. And it was Mary Haverstick who doggedly pursued it. And I think she contributed, we owe her a debt of gratitude for her contributions to the field of research about the JFK assassination. Anyway, my point in saying all that as I lead off today is all of that is CIA constructed. It's all in-house. Everyone involved in what we talked about yesterday was CIA. There wasn't any free agent from outside that got recruited in. It's all in-house, including the Patsy. So that was day one. Day two, today, the same question. What is the case for CIA? Excuse me, I'm sorry. What is the case for CIA involvement in the JFK assassination? Of course, this is part two. Pictured here, David Atlee Phillips on the left, station chief down Mexico City during the same time that QJ Wynn was down Mexico City station, headquartered there for ZR Rifle. And he's the disinformation chief for the CIA. He's also in charge of the Western Hemisphere. This is an important guy. And of course, shaking his hand is Alan Dulles, his boss, who's the director. So, we're right at the top here, right at the top. I want to talk about this guy briefly to start off. His name is Mark Wyatt. Mark Wyatt had occasion to get to know William Harvey in Rome, Italy, because he became the liaison. He became the contact person that Harvey used to communicate and do business with Italian intelligence. And you remember Harvey had been sent there, sort of a punishment for his going off the reservation and doing things in Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Kennedy brothers were very unhappy about trying to stoke an invasion, trying to stoke a war between us and the Soviets, or an invasion of Cuba at the very least. So they banished him to Rome, Italy, thinking he wouldn't cause any trouble there. It just so happened this was the time period during which there was some political intrigue in Italy, and the socialists were becoming more and more popular with the people, and to the extent that the Christian Democrats, which had been popped up by the CIA, had been run in Italy, kind of like a proxy for the CIA for all these years, no longer had the faith and trust of the Italian people. They were more leaning towards the socialists. And so they wanted the socialists to have access to the levers of power. They wanted a coalition government formed. Well, this is about the same time Harvey is sent there, and the CIA obviously has no interest in the socialists being involved in government there. And so their job, Harvey's task is to sabotage the socialists and uh, set up these false flag attacks to blame on the socialists so the Italian people would turn against them. And the Christian Democrats, i.e. the CIA, and all the money they've spent supporting the Christian Democrats would triumph and still have the levers of power, still be in control of the government. So in the carrying out of these false flag attacks, William Harvey got into business with this guy, Mark Wyatt. And according to Wyatt, he testified that Harvey had proposed hiring mafia hitmen to assassinate Italian socialist and communist officials. And this is executive action all over again. this is why they call Harvey the assassination specialist or expert of the CIA. It's always what he defaults to. It's what he's good at. But he pretty much does it the same way. I mean, I think we learned yesterday he's pretty clever in hiding the agent. You know, QJ Wynn, still we don't know to 100% certainty who that was. We have our suspicions. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence pointing towards Jerry Cobb, but he didn't write it down anywhere, and he created all these layers and codes that pointed people off in these diverting people's attention to Europe, etc. So he's very clever in how he sets up the plausible deniability of ZR rifle, but in executive action, it's pretty straightforward. You know, they were hiring, it was right in the documents. It was to take out unfriendly foreign leaders. They hired European criminals or mafiosos to take care of all that. European criminals mainly for European targets, mafiosos for Latin American targets like Fidel Castro. Anyway, the point is this is what Harvey does. And so when he goes to Rome, Italy, it shouldn't be that surprising, I guess. When you get to know who Harvey is and what he's good at, what his specialty is, it's not going to take long for he's proposing an assassination program in Rome, Italy as well. According to Wyatt, Harvey, in November of '63, right before the assassination, got on a plane and traveled to Dallas, Texas, which he thought was odd. And he asked him about it. He said, "What are you going to Dallas for?" "What's it got to do with Rome, Italy, or your business at the CIA here in Italy?" And Harvey just kind of looked at him and said, "To look around." He says to look. And nothing. Remember, I've said this so many times. I don't believe in coincidences. So here we have the assassination specialists of the CIA coming to Dallas the same month JFK is assassinated in Dallas. And, he's not going to tell the real reason he's going. So he says to look around. I guess that's kind of his code for, mind your own business kind of a thing. But that is interesting. And of course, we find out later from E. Howard Hunt on his deathbed confession that Harvey was involved in his recruitment into the role that he played in the assassination. There was a meeting in Miami. And first of all, if you're not familiar, E. Howard Hunt was a longtime CIA operator. He was involved in just about every covert operation that the CIA was involved in during the 50s and early 60s. Of course, he came to fame in the 70s because he was one of the Watergate perps that was arrested. He was not one of the burglars, but he was one of the lookouts, kind of headed up the operation. He was stationed, if you remember, across the street from the Watergate complex in the Howard Johnson Motel. they'd found a room key in one of the burglars' pocket, and also a radio. And when they went searched out that room key, it led right to that Howard Johnson hotel room. And of course, E. Howard Hunt and his cohort, G. Gordon Liddy, had the other radio. So they were busted. And from that point forward, E. Howard Hunt was persona non grata, the CIA, and they're gonna arrange to have his wife killed. He tries to blackmail. I'm kind of just throwing a bunch of information out here right now about E. Howard Hunt. He tries to blackmail he and his wife to get money to keep quiet. Eventually, they kill his wife, and send a message to him: "You better keep quiet." He understood the message, and at some point they set him up during the House Select Committee. They decided, you know what, this limited hangout, the CIA decides to kind of throw E. Howard Hunt under the bus because he's been discredited by this point because of what happened at Watergate. Everybody, it's very public that he was a bad guy or he was involved in some bad things. So they kind of threw him under the bus. And so at some point, right before he dies, he decides finally to come clean. He denied it forever, but before he dies, he comes clean. So this is a long time CIA guy. It was a family operation. His wife was in the CIA as well. If you talk to his kids, it was a very cloak and dagger kind of existence that they had in that house because of who mom and dad were. He was involved in all the anti-Cuba, anti-Castro stuff. And of course, then he was involved in all the plumbers and the Watergate stuff. So fast forward to his deathbed. This is a picture of him on his deathbed. And according to E. Howard Hunt, he was invited to Miami in 1963. So this is the key year, by Frank Sturgis. Of course, we know Frank Sturgis. He is a CIA self-admitted assassin. And when I say self-admitted, I mean, he, in his own words, he said that's what he did for the CIA. Different periods during which he had to testify before this committee or that investigative body. They asked him what he did. He was a CIA assassin. Okay. So anyway, he invites E. Howard Hunt. They have a long relationship. If you remember, it wasn't that long ago in 1962, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK and his brother shut down Operation Mongoose bases and went down, took their C4, took their weapons, closed down the bases, and then got word that two guys were still carrying out attacks. And the two guys were Frank Sturgis and E. Howard Hunt. Same two guys. So these guys know each other. They've been in business. That's the occasion that Bobby, as Attorney General, had him arrested for violation of the Neutrality Act, carrying out acts of war against a nation we are not technically at war with, which is Cuba. So by this point in time, neither one of them have any love. There's no love lost between them and the Kennedy brothers, certainly. And they know each other very well. So Frank Sturgis invites him to Miami in 1963. Of course, Frank Sturgis is also one of the Watergate. He's actually one of the burglars who was arrested in 1972. So it's always the same cast of characters over and over and over again, which is why Nixon panicked, of course. And at this meeting in Miami, he gets recruited for a, quote, off-the-board operation. And the guy who recruits him is David Morales. Now, David Morales is a veteran of the CIA and all the anti-Castro operations. He's also known as a CIA enforcer, which means of all the CIA guys who carry out hits, this is the guy. He's like the A-lister. He's the guy that you call last if nobody else can do the job. David Morales, he was quite a character. Great big guy, very intimidating guy. And according to Hunt, Sturgis and Morales, in their conversations with Hunt, revealed to Hunt that they had been recruited to this, quote, off-the-board operation by Bill Harvey. So you knew this was going to come back to Bill Harvey, right? You knew that's where we were going. So this happens in Miami, and he calls it the, quote, big event. And he says that, this is in his deathbed confession, he says Harvey and Morales hired the sharpshooters to kill JFK, and we were hired to transport the weapons to Dallas. And I told that story about Marita Lorenz and how she joined them on this trip to Dallas from Miami. They were in several different cars, and the trunks of all the cars were full of weapons. And when they got to Dallas, they went to a motel room. And when they went in, E. Howard Hunt was in the motel room, and he paid Frank Sturgis cash money for the weapons. Marita Lorenz was standing there, and uh, that's where Jack Ruby knocked on the door. They got a knock on the door while they're meeting, exchanging the weapons and the cash. Ruby comes in and he's furious. What is she doing here? Talk about Marita Lorenz. And they make her go stand outside for a few minutes while they talk about her behind her back. And in the end, she ended up going back to Miami. She said the operation was different. This was different than normal gun running, and she didn't want any part of it. So she went back to Miami, and Frank Sturgis stayed and got, that's during the time that they were there. She saw Lee Harvey Oswald. She saw Jack Ruby. Obviously, E. Howard Hunt was there. Frank Sturgis was there. She was there. And these were all folks that had been recruited into this operation by Bill Harvey and David Morales, according to E. Howard Hunt. Hunt's role in the assassination of the big event was to act as a bench warmer. In other words, he was a ready and willing substitute should he be needed. He didn't actually carry out any of the shooting or anything. He was in a bench warmer role. And according to Hunt, LBJ was at the top of this plot, and he signed off on it. Of course, if if you were if you watched the episodes I did on the deep state and how the corporate world invented this operating principle called ultra vires, which was part about pursuing profits, but partly also about immunizing themselves against any kinds of liability. This is that operating principle at work here in this plot. You don't carry out this plot unless you have the immunity built in. You've already figured out how to immunize yourself and all the plotters against any blowback. We saw that in ZR Rifle yesterday. In case of any blow, blame the Russians, blame one of our own for being connected to the Russians. And that's one of the hallmarks of these CIA operations. They always cover themselves. They always have immunity built in. And of course, LBJ is everyone's immunizing ticket, because if he's on your side, he's the president, he's got to determine the course of the investigation. He's going to appoint the Warren Commission member. He's going to put Alan Dulles in a key position. And he is going to tie off any investigation in Texas or the Congress and wrap it all up in this blue ribbon commission, and the cover-up happens. All right, so immunity is built in through LBJ and Alan Dulles. But you can see the flow chart that he draws up. Cord Meyer was involved in this plot. Cord Meyer, of course, was the husband of Mary Pinchot Meyer. And he's the longtime CIA guy who's been involved in the Operation Mockingbird and other big operations. Well, he's next in the flow chart underneath LBJ, and under him are David Morales, Bill Harvey. They're kind of heading up the operation itself. And then beneath that, you see the grassy knoll written in where he says the fatal shot came from, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is just to show more evidence that obviously Bill Harvey, anything Bill Harvey's connected to, or David Morales, or Cord Meyer, E. Howard, these are all CIA guys. Every one of them. Okay, so this is more evidence of CIA involvement. E. Howard Hunt's deathbed confession, which is corroboration of what we've already learned from Marita Lorenz and others about that Miami meeting and the Dallas trip, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all corroborated. Hunt, who, as I said, denied being in Dallas all those years, and then the CIA decides after the Watergate thing during the House Select Committee, kind of throw him under the bus. The way that they did that was they released a memo, and this inter-office memo had said someday we're going to have to discuss, we're going to have to answer for why E. Howard Hunt was in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. So not only is it confirmed by E. Howard Hunt's uh, own confession that he was in Dallas that day as a bench warmer, the CIA confirmed it in a memo. And a lot of, this is a famous photo of the three tramps, and a lot of people suspected that these three tramps were actually, or two of them, in the back, is I've got circled the very back one, which is the far right. A lot of people suspect that that is E. Howard Hunt, and the middle guy is Frank Sturgis, and that they were dressed up like tramps, acting like tramps, but they were on site. That was their cover, and they were actually detained briefly on that day, and this photo was shot. Um, and so anyway, not sure that that's who that is, but the resemblance is very strong, both men, including their size. E. Howard Hunt was a smaller guy. Frank Sturgis was a bigger guy, as you can see. And anyway, pretty convincing evidence, not just this picture. I mean, this picture is just anecdotal, but the memo from the CIA, the deathbed confession from E. Howard Hunt, the Marina Lorenz, all his testimony is so convincing that all these CIA people were there and involved, running weapons for the event, hiring the sharpshooters, paying cash, I mean, all this stuff. And now we know that the ZR rifle agent had at least flown an airplane to Redbird Airfield that day and was probably on Dealey Plaza as well. My goodness, the case for CIA involvement, everywhere you look, there's CIA people. We find out, we've talked about the S-Force and how Santos Trafficante tells the story about the S-Force and how they turned against Kennedy after that they canceled the Operation Mongoose and other events. And instead of carrying out the hit against Castro like they were trained, they just carried out the hit against Kennedy, and they used the exact same training. Now, this is one of the reasons why Nixon panicked, because this S-Force was put together through his efforts with Howard Hughes and Robert Mayhew and Johnny Rosselli and Santos Trafficante, Sam Giancana, Carlos Marcello. I mean, the list is long. Sheffield Edwards was there. And so he was afraid when these burglars got caught at Watergate, and he saw the names, he realized these are the same guys that made up this S-Force that he realized had turned on Kennedy and assassinated him in Dallas. So, if anybody investigates these S-Force guys too closely, it's going to lead back to Dallas, and especially that check that they found in Bernard Barker's pocket. It's going to lead back to that bank in Mexico City, which has been paying these S-Force guys, which are now plumbers, for all these years. So he panics about that. Well, the proof that, these S-Force members, we know they were there. There were all kinds of witnesses. And I've already gone over that in earlier episodes, all the S-Force members that were in Dallas that day. And we know that they were paid operatives by the CIA because Santos Trafficante did not recruit his own people for this operation. When he was putting together the S-Force, he recruited back Operation 40 guys that the CIA had recruited from him. So he kind of loaned them to the CIA. So he's borrowing them back. And he says, this covers me, because these guys have been CIA carrying out Operation 40 for the last few years, which means they've been paid by the CIA, which means they're CIA. And the CIA will move heaven and earth to cover up any exposure of these S-Force guys if they know it leads back to them. That was a smart move by Trafficante, by the way. So the fact that all 15 members of the S-Force, which ends up carrying out the hit on JFK in Dallas on that day, Frank Sturgis was involved with the S-Force. E. Howard Hunt was involved with the S-Force. Tosh Plumley was the pilot for the S-Force. We know he was in Dallas that day. He'd flown Johnny Rosselli in. Johnny Rosselli was part of the group that put the S-Force together. He was in Dallas acting as a spotter that day. This place is crawling with S-Force people. And all 15 members of this S-Force had signed in time and again at that Fort Huachaca in Arizona before they disappeared across the border to go to Clint Murchison's estate to ranch to train. They signed in as government employees. Uh, These are no longer mafiosos. These are no longer Santos's people. These are government employees. That was how they signed in before they disappeared. We now know because of the church hearings that the CIA did have an active assassination program. Actually had two of them going simultaneously. The executive action, which was aimed at unfriendly foreign leaders, and then ZR rifle that we talked about. So, and uh, the ZR rifle people were in Dallas, you know, and then we have the story of William Pauly with, on his yacht, the Flying Tiger, as the S Force is trying to basically go into Cuba and grab up these two Soviet officers that are trying to defect to America. And maybe if they get a chance, assassinate Castro while they're there. You remember the interaction Pauly is having with uh, the other guy on the boat. I can't remember his name right now. Uh, John Martino. It was John Martino, and Martino was ranting and raving on the boat while they waited for the S Force about how Kennedy was this and Kennedy was that. He's a son of a bitch. He's a blankety blank because he shut down all the Operation Mongoose, blah, 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 ranting and raving, drinking, kind of just running off, shooting off at the lip. And William Pauly, who is a documented participant in the CIA's executive action program and also participated in the operation to overthrow the Guatemalan government in 1954. He's a civilian advisor to the CIA, kind of in that Howard Hughes mode. He's an FBI informant. He's best friends with Allen Dulles. And to the degree that he lets them use his private yacht for all their little covert ops. That's why they're there. They're on his yacht. And he tells Martino, he says, hey, don't worry about it, man. We're going to kill that mother blankety blank. And the reason we know that story is because Dick Billings, the Time Life reporter, is on the boat, and he's there to document this heist, this covert op, get pictures, write a story, blow it up real big in Time Life, and make the CIA look good. And so he's there as a witness. He tells the story. He heard Pauly say it, and so uh, uh, it's just more evidence. Everyone who's uh, you know in Dallas that day is connected to the CIA. This S forces, they were recruited and paid by the CIA. They were trained by the CIA. Carl Jenkins and William Rip Robertson were full-time CIA guys who did all the training. And their training was to use high-powered rifles with a scope and shoot from distance on a moving target. That was to kill Castro. And then when they turned, they used the same training from the same people to carry out the hit against Kennedy. That's exactly how Kennedy died. And of course, then we have the story about William Pauly and the anecdotal evidence there that something is afoot, and it's CIA related, it's S Force related. And he's reassuring John Martino, don't worry, he's going to be taken care of. So this is just another piece of evidence the CIA was involved in the assassination of JFK. And then we get into the S Force members that were actually present in Dealey Plaza. Witnesses saw David Morales there. Witnesses saw Frank Sturgis there. Witnesses saw E. Howard Hunt there. There were others. All right, Johnny Rosselli, Tosh Plumley, as I name. Witnesses saw these people there. And then you look at the wounds to JFK's body. This is one of the things my students always bring up. It really resonates with them. And they said, well, if you just look at where the wounds were on his body, he couldn't have been shot from just one direction. I mean, he got hit in the front of the neck. That's a front shot, even though the Warren Commission is going to try to turn that into an exit wound. All the doctors, everybody who knows and worked on him first, they all said that was a wound of entrance. That's a front shot. And then you got the back shot, and then you got the side shot. That's a triangulated hit. And I don't even bring it up. I just kind of go through the evidence. And then as we discuss it, inevitably, one of them brings it up. They're like, well, just look at it. This seems like common sense. if you just look at the body and the physical wounds, he was hit from the front, the side, and behind. That's a triangular hit. That indicates at least three shooters, probably three teams of shooters from three different locations. And that is the S-Force training, a triangulated hit from distance with high-powered rifle and a scope on a moving target. That was their training. And that's how he was taken out. And then you look at who was set up to take the fall to be the patsy. We learned yesterday in the ZR rifle program, this was numero uno. You know, as they're putting a creation document together for ZR rifle, they said the first thing we got to do is recruit one of our own to take the fall for this, to be the patsy, in case there's any blowback or anything, we got to have a cover story ready to blame somebody that has Soviet ties. Well, not only does Oswald, the guy they choose to pin the assassination on, have Soviet ties, which are going to be included in the cover story. What's not included in the cover story, obviously, is his connections to the CIA. They're just, I mean, we spent I don't know how many episodes talking about all the different connections of Oswald to the CIA, but just quickly recapping his time in Atsugi. You know, here he is. He's a high school dropout, and he's been sent to the U-2 base, which is our premier spy plane program. He's got top security clearances, and he's acting Russian. He's acting communist this whole time, learning the Russian language, and he's doing well in the Russian language. This isn't some local idiot just fell off the turnip truck. This guy's smart enough to learn what most people consider to be the hardest language to learn if you're an adult, Russian language, and he's doing well at it, to the point where Marina Oswald, when she meets him in Minsk, thinks his Russian was so good, she didn't pick up that he was American right away, even though he looked American. And then this fake defection thing. I mean, my God, it was so obvious that he was part of the fake defector program, being let back in the United States. No harm done, no problems. And then the whole summer of '63, who he's hanging out with, these are all CIA guys, every one of them. And he's being sheep dipped, and he's, half the time he's pro-Castro, the other half he's working with the anti-Castro people, the Guy Bannisters, the David Ferries of the world. And meanwhile, he's also involved in this bioweapon project in the evenings with Judith Ferry, putting together a cancer virus. I mean, everything there in a movie makes. He never has an independent thought or an independent action. Every movie he makes has been ordered by somebody involved in the CIA. He's handled, Guy Bannister is his handler in New Orleans. When he gets to Dallas, it's the first time he's in Dallas, it's George de Mohrenschildt. And then the second time, it's Michael and Ruth Payne. And cover jobs are arranged for him. He goes to New Orleans, it's Riley Coffey. When he goes to Dallas, it's the Texas School Book Depository. I mean, and then you have the CIA director, John McCone, admitting it in a memo to the Secret Service in March of '64. He just flat out admits it. Oswald's subject was trained by this agency, under the cover of the Office of Naval Intelligence, which makes sense since he was in the Marine Corps, for Soviet assignments. During preliminary training in 1957, subject was active in serial reconnaissance of mainland China and maintained a security clearance up to and including the confidential level. His military records during this period are open to your agency, and I have directed they be forwarded to the commission. He goes on to talk about a special assignment in the next paragraph. It's hard to read, but he gives the years and the dates, and his special assignment was in the Soviet Union, and his field of operation was going to be the city of Minsk, which is where he ends up. I mean, of course, none of this makes it into the cover story. Wouldn't do to have a CIA guy be accused of being the assassin. So they denied any links. And of course, Alan Dulles being basically in charge of the commission, that was very handy to help deny any Oswald links to the CIA. But they're there. No matter how much they try to hide them, they're there. Then you think about what happened after the assassination, how it was the CIA who was intricately involved in all this evidence. Some of it, like for example, the Zapruder film. If you remember the story, when the Time Life guys show up to pick up the Zapruder film that they had purchased, their company had purchased, take it back to Chicago, it was already gone. Zapruder's like, well, I thought you guys came yesterday. I'm like, no. Who came yesterday? Well, these two guys dressed up uh, like you are, said they were from Time Life, and they picked it up. Turns out they were CIA guys, and they took it back to a lab. Who knows the monkey business that went on in that lab with the Zapruder film? But the CIA took it first before they turned it over to Time Life. Then this whole Mexico City story, which of course David Atlee Phillips came up with, and this is, evidence that gets dropped into the public domain. Oh, the CIA has tapes of Oswald on the phone talking to Valery Kostikov, a well-known member of the KGB's Department 13, which is sabotage and assassination. This guy's an assassination expert. And in the month before the assassination, the guy accused of the assassination of JFK was talking to a Soviet assassination expert on the phone. And so people say, well, let's hear the tapes. Yeah, the FBI listens to the tapes, and they listen to the voice, and they do a voice analysis, and every one of their agents reported back to J. Edgar Hoover, that's not Oswald. We have sat in a room with Oswald for a couple days interrogating him after he was arrested. We know what his voice sounds like. That was not his voice. So then the tapes disappeared. When word comes out from the FBI, even Hoover tells President Johnson, he says, that's not his voice on the tapes. That evidence is not of Oswald. That's somebody else. And so then all of a sudden the tapes disappear, and all the CIA has left are written transcripts. Okay. And then they say they also have photos of Oswald at the Soviet embassy in Mexico City, and he's trying to get, a travel visa, and he's at the Cuban embassy, and they got all these photos. And when they release the photos, it's this guy. And I mean, I can look at that. Anyone can look at that and quickly deduce that is not Lee Harvey Oswald. It's not him. But this guy who's claiming to be him, or the CIA is claiming it's him, went in and signed in as Lee Harvey Oswald at both of these embassies. So now we know there's a doppelganger down running around trying to lay a trail of incriminating evidence to Oswald. It's part of that cover story that Z.R. Rifle talked about. We got to tie him to Soviet intelligence, tie him to the Soviets in some manner, shape, form. When they release this story, and it so quickly falls apart when the photos are clearly not him, the tapes disappear because the voice is clearly not his. All of a sudden, this Mexico City story is falling all apart. J. Edgar Hoover tries to save it. The FBI tries to get people to testify that, yeah, he was in Mexico City. Then we did see him at the embassies and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the whole story falls apart. But the fact that they tried this is all a CIA concoction, tells you that the CIA is involved in this from get-go, because this is their cover story. This is part of the evidence they're using to blame or point blame in the direction of Lee Harvey Oswald. Then we find out from Richard Case Nagel that the CIA had been setting up Oswald in advance. Richard Case Nagel was the double agent that told the KGB, says, hey, listen, this is what's going on. The Alpha 66, which is a CIA front group, anti-Castro front group, is planning to kill Kennedy. And they're setting up Oswald to be the patsy, and they're setting him up to be the patsy with Russian. It's going to lead back to us. It's going to lead back to you, because they're setting him up as a Soviet agent. And so they're going to tell the American people that the Soviets were behind this, and they used Oswald to carry it out. And so you remember the story KGB tells Nagel, you got to kill him, or you got to tell him. And if he doesn't believe you, then you got to kill him, because we can't let this happen. We can't let the assassination of JFK happened to be blamed on us. And of course, you remember the story of Richard Case Nagel. He's damned if he does, he's damned if he doesn't. If he if he tells Oswald and Oswald doesn't believe in, he has to kill him. He's just murdered an American agent. And and so that's a crime, right? The other one is treason. If he does nothing and it happens, he's committed treason against his own country. So he's like, man, I'm between a rock and a hard place. So he goes into a bank down in Texas and he shoots the bank up and he gets arrested. He just gives himself up, goes out, sits in the car, waits for the police. And when they arrest him, he says, well, I'd rather be in jail, sitting there in jail for murder or for attempted burglary, whatever you're going to charge him with, than commit murder or treason. And of course, they didn't have any clue what he's talking about, but he did. And that's why the CIA or the KGB was clued in when the FBI, when the CIA tried to drop that story or that letter that they had written, ostensibly by Oswald, this letter that they sent to the KGB office in Washington saying, basically admitting to all these things that he'd been up to in Mexico City and how he'd met with Kostakov and the plan was going forward. And of course, they knew that the FBI had read this letter and it was going to make Oswald and the Soviets look very, very guilty. But the KGB was wise to it. They knew, oh, this is all part of the setup. And so they confronted the CIA. They confronted the American government, says, listen, we're going to release this publicly and we're going to release this with prejudice saying that you guys put this together. This is a plot by you to set him up and to set us up. And so the whole Mexico City story, the whole setup of Oswald has fallen apart, and all this work to set him up, it's fallen apart because of Richard Case Nagel. And because they used these ridiculous photos and they tried to say that those tapes were his voice, and it was clearly not his voice. It was just a shoddy job, which is why David Atlee Phillips had to disavow it at some point. And he's like, oh, let's just pretend like this never happened, this whole Mexico City thing. It just fell apart. But it was all CIA that did all that. So the fact they did a shoddy job is not the point. The fact that they did it is the point. And then we have some more evidence that the CIA was involved, tipping Dallas police to a man named Harvey Lee Oswald. This is military intelligence. It tips the Dallas police to a Harvey Lee Oswald. Of course, military intelligence, we've learned by the memo that McCone sent that he was under the cover of Office of Naval Intelligence, but he was a CIA agent. So this is all coming from the CIA. This is coming from Langley. And this name was dropped into Dallas police. We know where it came from because the name was misapplied. It was Harvey Lee instead of Lee Harvey. That came right from the military records. Within 14 minutes of the assassination, they've dropped the name into the laps of the Dallas police. From then on, everyone knows who they're chasing. So this is what you do. You've got the guy set up. You've got the cover story prepared. You just got to drop his name like little breadcrumbs. Hansel and Gretel follow the breadcrumbs to the candy house. And the candy house in this case is the Texas Theater. And everything that happened in between from the 14 minutes on to the Texas Theater was droppings by the CIA, leading them to their ultimate destination to arrest Lee Harvey Oswald. And then in 75, we find out through the Church Committee that the CIA has been involved in all these covert ops, two of which are intended to assassinate people. One's a foreign assassination program, the other is a domestic assassination program, ZR Rifle. And then they find out about termination with extreme prejudice, which was the practice to leave the bodies in such a condition, A, you either couldn't tell the cause of death, or B, it looked like they died of natural causes. And now you start to question all these other people that are dying and whether or not the CIA was involved in that, because they've got these two concurrent assassination programs, and they're, Warren Commission, House Select Committee, Church Committee, all these investigations are looking into assassinations. And here is the CIA with these now documented 2 assassination programs and a program to do it in such a way, in some cases, that the bodies look like they died, or the people died of natural causes. You start looking at witnesses and how they died, and it looks like TWEP is a way to take care of anybody who might spill the beans about JFK or about ZR rifle, about executive action, whatever else. And it's painting a really bad picture. And then, of course, the documents were released by the 2 CIA directors who wanted to come clean. They call them the family jewels. Confirm a CIA mafia Cuban alliance to assassinate Castro. Of course, none of this made it to the Warren Commission. It all happened afterwards, after the Warren Commission pinned all the blame on the CIA patsy. And it didn't happen until almost more than a decade later. But that's what we know now. So what I am going through today is what we know now, not what they knew then. It's what we know now. And it's clear every step of the way, the CIA is in control. They're in charge of everything. The setup, the operation itself, the people that are recruited into the operation, the cover-up, the evidence, handling of the evidence. Every part of this is controlled by the CIA, up to and including the ultimate blue ribbon commission, which is the Warren Commission. Again, immunity. They've got the ultimate immunity, and his name is LBJ. And LBJ assigns David Alan Dulles to be part of the commission to ensure that the CIA is immunized, the federal government is immunized against any blowback that might come their way as a result of the investigation into the death of the president. And that's the role that Alan Dulles fulfills. So you don't begin these operations until you have the end covered. You got to make sure that, it's like Oliver Stone said in the movie, that the folks that did it would never be held responsible, would never face accountability. And the way that you do that through ultravirus is you make sure and immunize yourself. How do you do that? You make sure that the person who's going to succeed President Kennedy is somebody who's on your team. And so that he can appoint somebody who can cover up all the roles of the CIA, and he'll run the commission. And that's exactly what happened with Alan Dulles. David Talbot said it should have been called the Dulles Commission. And I mentioned this quote earlier just to speak to the state of mind and the view that Alan Dulles had towards JFK. That little Kennedy, he thought he was a god. And wow, it's an amazing setup. So today's lesson is about, part 2, more evidence the CIA was involved. Yesterday was ZR rifle, the actual covert op that was put in place during lasting the duration of Kennedy's presidency. Today was more or less about all the personnel involved and all the different CIA connections. Every person we've discussed today is CIA connected. I haven't discussed, I guess LBJ isn't, but other than that, everybody else is CIA connected. All the Mexico City story, that was a CIA concoction by David Atlee Phillips, who's the station chief of the CIA station in Mexico City. The S-Force, these are all, this was with the blessing of Sheffield Edwards put together. These are CIA guys that were Operation 40. Now they're part of a special assassination team. They're being trained in Mexico City, or in Mexico at Murchison's Ranch by CIA trainers, Carl Jenkins, William Rip Robertson. They sign in even as they disappear across the border as government employees. William Harvey in the Miami meeting to recruit David Morales and E. Howard Hunt, Frank Sturgis. These are all CIA people. At some point, you have to say, this was a CIA operation. And you almost have to purposely bury your head in the sand, say, no, these are just rogue elements within the CIA. Rogue elements. Alan Dulles is the director. Richard Bissell was director of plans. He was the number 2. Richard Helms was a future director. William Harvey, well, anyway, I'm preaching to the choir, but you get my point. So this is part two of CIA involvement. We have a part three tomorrow, which gets into some pretty interesting areas. I think it's interesting, and what some foreign leaders think, and what they have concluded based on what their intelligence services have told them in the moments, in real time, right after it happened. It's pretty interesting. The story, the painting that they portray, the picture that they portray of what happened to JFK and how the American people are going to be led along like sheep and are going to not only believe it, they're going to want to believe the story that the government tells them because they don't want to know the truth. It's too terrible. Going to that psyop thing that we discussed before, how we all have this need, this craving, it's subconscious, we don't even realize it, to have the riddle solved for us and to be told what happened and to be assured that everything is under control and that they've taken care of it, they being the government. And so when events like this happen that we can't ascertain at least in the moment, why something happened or the reasons behind it, or a lot of uncertainty and it's a little bit scary. We want to be reassured. And that's where the government steps in and reassures us with this cover story prepared in advance. And of course, somebody has to prepare that cover story. We learned yesterday who does that. It's the CIA. All right, that's my topic for today. My episode, I think that's episode 78, mistaken. And so feel free to subscribe to this channel. It's free. And also check out my website, sphistory.com. Also, feel free to hit the notification bell, give me a thumbs up, and keep the comments coming. We learned a lot yesterday. I thought yesterday was a really good episode that generated a lot of conversation back and forth. The fact that I even did that episode is because of one of the listeners who brought to my attention the book by Mary Haverstick. I'd never heard of the book. I'd never heard of Mary Haverstick. I'd never heard of Jerry Cobb. That's how well hidden. I've studied the JFK assassination since 1996. So however many years that is, it's almost 30 years, right? I've never come across the name Jerry Cobb until here recently. And I'd studied ZR rifle, but it never really made sense to me. For the same reason Frank Church didn't make sense to him. Why do we have two assassination programs? It made sense after I read her book. So that's an example of how I've learned from you. And I think we're all learning from each other. So that's the point of this, is try to push the ball further towards the goal line. So appreciate everybody's input. And I hope everybody has a great day till tomorrow. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. We'll talk tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.